The courtroom was colder than the December air outside, not in temperature but in spirit. Sterile, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh pallor across peeling walls and scuffed floors. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and old papers, places built not for dignity, but for processing. In the center of the room, the bailiff led an old man in handcuffs down the aisle. Each step was a struggle, not from resistance, but from a lifetime of injuries never properly healed. The room barely noticed him. To the few spectators in attendance, he was just another case on a crowded docket. Another shadow. The clerk, reading from a screen, barely looked up. "Name?" she asked, voice mechanical. The old man, his frame swallowed by a threadbare military jacket, lifted his head slightly. Deep lines carved by hardship and time furrowed his face, but somewhere, buried beneath the years, there was still the faint memory of pride. He cleared his throat, the sound rough, unused. "Samuel Carter," he said, voice trembling but steady. "Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." A few heads turned, not out of respect but curiosity, like one might glance at a noise in the distance. Sam stood silently as the formalities continued, his calloused hands shackled loosely in front of him, the faded jacket hanging off his gaunt shoulders like a relic of another life. He had worn dress blues once, metals gleaming, posture like iron. Now he shifted uncomfortably under the weight of unseen eyes, a man out of place and out of time. The prosecutor, Ryan Cole, young and polished, rose smoothly. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly combed, and when he spoke, it was with the ease of someone who had never truly been cold or hungry a day in his life. "Your Honor, the city charges Mr. Carter with disturbance of the peace, trespassing, and resisting arrest. He has been repeatedly warned about loitering behind the Jefferson Street Cafe. This is the third complaint filed this month." There was a coldness in his tone, an impatience, as if Sam were not a man but a broken fixture cluttering the clean lines of city life. No one mentioned why Sam had been there. No one said he had huddled by the kitchen exhaust vent, chasing the only warmth he could find on freezing nights. Or that he never begged, never hassled customers, never asked for anything more than a few quiet minutes of refuge. Ben Whitaker, the cafe's cook, sometimes slipped him scraps, a half sandwich here, a cup of lukewarm coffee there. Ben never saw a vagrant. He saw a man who wore the same Marine Corps insignia his father once wore. But in this courtroom, kindness was irrelevant. The arresting officer, James Reynolds, took the stand next, a rookie by appearance, crisp in uniform, eager in manner. Found the defendant seated behind the cafe at approximately 11:45 p.m., instructed him to vacate. He refused. Sam winced slightly, not at the officer's words, but at their memory. He hadn't refused. He had simply asked, voice low and polite, "5 more minutes, please, just to finish this sandwich." But the night had been cold. The officer had been impatient. The cuffs had been swift. Judge Evelyn Brooks peered down at Sam over her glasses. Her hair, pinned neatly back, gave no hint of emotion. Her robe, black and imposing, only added to the sense of distance. "Mr. Carter," she said, "do you have representation?" Sam shook his head. His assigned public defender had been pulled into another trial that morning. He was alone. "Would you like to make a statement on your behalf?" For a moment he hesitated, not out of fear, but wariness, the exhaustion of a man who had explained himself too many times to too many people who had already made up their minds. Finally he spoke. "No excuses, Your Honor," he said. His voice was raspy, almost apologetic, just trying to stay warm. A murmur stirred at the edges of the room, quickly dying. The few in attendance scribbled notes, filed papers, adjusted their watches. No one leaned in, no one listened. Prosecutor Ryan Cole pressed on, undeterred. "Given the defendant's repeated infractions, the city requests community service and a 30-day no-trespass order for the downtown business district." Sam blinked. 30 days. A no-trespass order meant no more 4th Street shelter, no more hot meals at St. Andrew's Church, no more vents blowing warm air behind a friendly cafe. In the cruelest winter months, it meant no more survival. A life boiled down to case numbers and paperwork. A man boiled down to a nuisance. Sam glanced briefly at the courtroom gallery. A few strangers fiddled with phones. A couple whispered behind their hands. No one looked at him with recognition. No one remembered. And why would they? The parades had ended decades ago. The thank you speeches, the folded flags, they had all faded into history books and lost memories. Now, he was just another old man in handcuffs, another reminder of promises made and quietly broken. As Ryan Cole gathered his papers, preparing to sit, he added without looking up, "The city believes that appropriate action will both protect local businesses and encourage the defendant to seek alternative accommodations." Alternative accommodations. The city spoke in polished euphemisms. Sam understood the translation: disappear. Judge Brooks scribbled something in her notes, then paused, studying him. There was something, some tiny flicker, behind her eyes. A hesitation, but just as quickly her judicial mask slid back into place. "Very well," she said. "We will proceed." Sam Carter, once Sergeant Carter, once the man who had crossed fields of fire to carry wounded brothers to safety, stood alone. No applause for this battlefield, no flag waving, no medals, just silence and the slow, inevitable judgment of a world that had already forgotten him. The gavel struck once, a dull sound swallowed by the cavernous room. "Proceed," Judge Brooks said, her voice flat, her face unreadable. Sam Carter sat back down, hands folded awkwardly in his lap, cuffs clinking lightly against each other. The metal bit into his weathered skin, but he hardly noticed. The larger ache was deeper, older, the ache of being seen, yet unseen. The prosecutor, Ryan Cole, leaned into his argument with a polish that betrayed no real animosity, only the casual efficiency of someone doing their job. "Your Honor, we maintain that the defendant's repeated presence behind private businesses creates not only a nuisance, but a potential liability issue for property owners." He clicked his pen once, twice. Sam flinched slightly at the sharp, mechanical noise. Cole continued, "Additionally, the city believes that without strict enforcement of trespassing ordinances, we encourage further disruption of downtown commerce. Businesses have a right to operate free from obstruction." The words washed over Sam like icy rain. Cold, clinical, detached. Officer Reynolds retook the stand to reinforce his earlier testimony, repeating the same phrases: refusal, non-compliance, standard procedure, until they lost any human weight. No one spoke of the cold so deep it gnawed at your bones. No one mentioned the biting wind that howled down the empty alleys where Sam huddled to survive. No one asked what a 70-year-old man, decorated for valor, was doing sleeping behind dumpsters in a country he once fought to defend. Instead, the conversation turned to property values, to pedestrian traffic, to appearances. A whisper of irritation rippled from the back of the courtroom when a baby fussed, quickly hushed by its embarrassed mother. The machinery of justice had no time for small disruptions, or for broken veterans. Judge Brooks asked routine questions, her tone even. The answers from the prosecution came quickly, smoothly. The case against Sam seemed simple, almost boring: loitering, trespassing, disturbance. Words filed neatly into checkboxes, as if a man's entire existence could be reduced to legal shorthand. When it was his turn again, Sam struggled to his feet. The bailiff made no move to help him. Judge Brooks adjusted her glasses and asked, "Mr. Carter, do you understand the charges against you?" Sam nodded slowly. "I do, Your Honor." "Do you have anything else to add before the court considers sentencing?" Sam hesitated, a lifetime of dignity fighting the urge to explain, to plead. But what would it matter? He straightened slightly, muscle memory still alive somewhere deep in his spine, and said, "I wasn't trying to cause trouble, ma'am. Just trying to stay warm. Didn't mean no harm." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from emotion. From disuse. For a moment, Judge Brooks' hand faltered as she made a note. Just a moment. Then she composed herself again. Across the courtroom, a few spectators exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, some indifferent. A man in a Marine Corps League jacket sitting quietly near the back leaned forward, studying Sam closely. But he said nothing. Not yet. The prosecutor, sensing no opposition, moved toward closing remarks. "In light of the circumstances and the defendant's record of prior warnings," Ryan Cole said crisply, "the city maintains its recommendation of community service and a no trespass order, effective immediately." Sam's heart sank lower with each word. He knew what it meant. It meant no 4th Street shelter, no church meals, no friendly faces, no exhaust vents, just cold and silence. And a slow fade into the oblivion of the streets, one unnoticed life among many. Judge Brooks glanced over the papers on her bench again. A brief hesitation. Something caught her eye. Something buried in the yellowed records that accompanied Sam's file. But before she could question it further, The heavy courtroom doors creaked open. Heads turned. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit strode inside, a leather briefcase in hand. He walked with quiet authority, heading straight for the defense table. Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow sharply. The man placed his briefcase down and spoke smoothly. "Your Honor, Daniel Hayes, representing Mr. Carter. I apologize for the late appearance. I have been retained to represent the defendant." Sam stared up at him, bewildered. He hadn't called a lawyer. He hadn't called anyone. Judge Brooks frowned. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Hayes. The court was not informed of any change in counsel." "It is a very recent development, Your Honor," Hayes said smoothly. "I request a brief recess to confer with my client." Judge Brooks considered. A pause hung heavy in the air. Finally, she nodded once. "The court will take a 15-minute recess." She struck the gavel lightly. "Mr. Carter, you may remain seated." As the courtroom began to empty for the recess, Sam turned to the stranger beside him. "I don't have money for a lawyer," he rasped. Daniel Hayes smiled, but there was no condescension in it, only quiet respect. "You don't need any," he said softly. "Our firm is handling your case pro bono." Sam blinked at him, confused. "Why?" Hayes glanced briefly toward Judge Brooks' now empty bench, then back at Sam. "Because some debts," he said quietly, "are too old and too important to be forgotten." Sam lowered his head again, trying to understand what was unfolding. The pressure he had carried for so long, the silent, crushing weight of being invisible, shifted slightly. Not lifted yet, but moved. For the first time in many years, Samuel Carter felt the faintest, most fragile spark inside him. Hope. The small conference room adjoining the courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Sam sat stiffly across from Daniel Hayes, his calloused hands clasped tightly together, eyes wary. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mr. Carter, there are things you need to know, things that are about to change the course of your case, and maybe more than that." Sam said nothing, his face a careful mask. Years on the street had taught him caution. Promises often came cheap. Real help was a rare currency. Daniel unfolded a file between them, one Sam hadn't seen, and tapped a page lightly. "You served with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines?" Sam nodded slowly. "Iraq 2004? Fallujah?" Another nod, slower this time. Sam's eyes darkened, memories stirring like ash blown by a sudden wind. Daniel chose his next words carefully. "Lieutenant Michael Brooks. Do you remember him?" Sam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Young officer. Brave," he said quietly. "Got hit during a firefight. I pulled him out." Daniel's voice softened. "You didn't just pull him out. According to military records, you saved his entire unit." Sam flinched, the praise hitting a nerve raw from years of silence. "I just did my job," he muttered, eyes fixed on the table. "No, Sergeant," Daniel said firmly. "You did more than your job. You saved lives, lives that had families, futures, and you deserve to be recognized for it." Before Sam could respond, the bailiff knocked briskly. Back to the courtroom. Sam stood slowly, joints aching, and followed Daniel out. As they re-entered, something had shifted. The room felt heavier somehow, charged. People had returned from recess with an undercurrent of restless curiosity, sensing that something unseen was beginning to unfold. Judge Evelyn Brooks sat at the bench once again, her posture impeccable, her glasses perched precisely on the bridge of her nose. But those who knew her well, if any in this room still did, might have noticed the slightest tremble in her hands as she arranged her papers. "Mr. Hayes," she said, voice calm but carrying a new undertone, "has your client decided how he wishes to proceed?" Daniel rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we request dismissal of all charges. My client was seeking shelter from dangerously low temperatures, and furthermore, he had implied permission from restaurant employees to be on the premises." The prosecutor, Ryan Cole, immediately moved to object. "Your Honor, the city cannot set a precedent." Judge Brooks lifted her hand, silencing him mid-sentence. She turned to Sam, her gaze steady. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice quieter now, almost personal. "Your military record indicates service in Fallujah in 2004. Is that correct?" Sam, sensing a shift he didn't fully understand, straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." "And on April 17th of that year," the judge continued, "were you involved in an operation outside the western outskirts of the city?" Sam's brow furrowed, memories flashing fast behind his tired eyes. "Convoy ambushed," he said slowly. "Heavy fire. We lost a lot of good men. And did you, Judge Brooks asked, voice tightening slightly, rescue a wounded Marine officer during that engagement? Sam's hands fidgeted unconsciously in his lap. Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Brooks, hit bad, wouldn't leave the others behind. I carried him to cover. From the gallery, the man in the Marine Corps League jacket, the one who had watched so intently, rose suddenly to his feet. His voice broke the heavy silence. That's him. He pointed at Sam, his voice cracking with emotion. That's Sergeant Carter. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a sudden breeze. Spectators leaned in. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Judge Brooks struck her gavel lightly for order, but her hands trembled so slightly that only Daniel Hayes, standing nearest, seemed to notice. Sam sat frozen, bewildered by the attention he had spent decades trying to avoid. He lowered his head, the old reflex of humility overwhelming any instinct for pride. Ryan Cole, rattled now, tried to recover. Your Honor, while Mr. Carter's military service is admirable, it's irrelevant to the charges at hand. Judge Brooks interrupted him with a voice sharper than any she had yet used. It is not irrelevant, she said. In fact, it has every bearing. The courtroom fell dead silent. Without waiting for further protest, Judge Brooks turned back to Sam. Mr. Carter, she said softly, please remain seated. There are matters beyond these charges we must address. Then she stood, gathering her robe around her like armor, and disappeared into her chambers without another word. The spectators whispered, confused. The bailiff looked around uncertainly. Sam remained seated, his heart pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from something far older, far more profound, recognition, not of himself, but of something long lost, of a moment when dignity, battered but unbroken, began to stir again. 15 minutes later, when the courtroom doors opened again, she would not return alone. The heavy oak doors swung open again, but this time, Judge Evelyn Brooks did not enter the courtroom alone. 3 Marines in full dress uniform marched behind her with solemn precision, a full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps and whispers rippled through the gallery. Some rose instinctively to their feet. Others simply stared, unsure yet sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding. Sam Carter remained seated, stunned, his body stiff and still. Judge Brooks resumed her place at the bench, but now there was something different in the way she carried herself. No longer just the distant authority figure behind the gavel. Now she stood as something older, deeper, a bridge between past sacrifice and present honor. She removed her glasses carefully, setting them aside on the bench. Then she spoke, not as a judge, but as a sister. Before we proceed further, I must disclose a matter of personal significance to this case, she said, her voice steady but resonant with feeling. The Lieutenant Michael Brooks mentioned by the defendant was my brother. A stunned silence fell across the room. Even the prosecutor, Ryan Cole, froze mid-breath. Judge Brooks continued, her hands clasped tightly before her gaze never leaving Sam. 20 years ago, during the Battle of Fallujah, my brother led a patrol that was ambushed. Pinned under enemy fire, he would not have survived. None of his unit would have, without the actions of a staff sergeant who refused to leave them behind. She paused, emotion thickening her voice, though she fought to maintain composure. That staff sergeant was Samuel Carter. The silver-haired Marine from the gallery, overcome, stood tall and saluted Sam across the courtroom. Others followed. Veterans in faded jackets, ordinary citizens recognizing something larger than themselves. One by one, the gallery rose to their feet. Attention, respect, honor. Sam Carter blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by the sea of standing figures before him. For a moment, the courtroom was silent, except for the creak of chairs and the soft sounds of people standing to bear witness. Colonel David Armstrong, the senior Marine, stepped forward. He addressed Sam directly, his voice firm and reverent. Staff Sergeant Samuel Carter, the United States Marine Corps has been seeking you for years. New intelligence and witness testimonies have prompted a review of your actions during the Battle of Fallujah. The corporal opened the polished case, revealing a medal gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, and in recognition of extraordinary gallantry at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, Armstrong announced, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Samuel J. Carter. The second highest military decoration, surpassed only by the Medal of Honor. The room audibly inhaled, a collective breath held tight in awe. Sam shook his head slightly, disbelief etched deep into his weathered features. "I was just doing my job," he said, his voice breaking under the weight of the moment. "No, Sergeant," Armstrong replied quietly. "You went beyond your duty. You lived the spirit of the Corps." Colonel Armstrong stepped closer, saluting Sam formally. The corporal offered the Navy Cross with reverence, and Sam, trembling, reached out with uncertain hands to accept it. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then from the gallery, a voice, clear, commanding, familiar. "Attention on deck." In an instant, every Marine, veteran, and service member in the room stood at rigid attention. Even civilians, unsure of the protocol, stood awkwardly, heads bowed, hearts pounding. Sam Carter sat frozen, the medal heavy in his hand, the salutes heavier still, not from obligation, not from ceremony, but from gratitude long overdue. Judge Brooks wiped her eyes quietly before speaking again. "In light of these extraordinary circumstances," she said, her voice shaking but proud, "all charges against Staff Sergeant Carter are hereby dismissed with prejudice." She struck the gavel once, firmly, but this time it sounded not like a judgment, it sounded like vindication. The courtroom, bound by tradition, held its silence for a few more heartbeats. Then the dam broke. Applause, tears, salutes held longer than protocol demanded. Sam rose slowly to his feet, the years seeming to fall away from his stooped shoulders. He stood tall, not because he was told to, but because somewhere deep inside, something had been restored. His name, his dignity, his place in a world that had tried to forget him. Daniel Hayes stepped beside him, steadying his trembling hand. Colonel Armstrong clapped a strong hand on Sam's shoulder. And Judge Evelyn Brooks, no longer hiding behind robes or rolls, stepped down from the bench. She approached Sam with slow, deliberate steps and said simply, "You didn't just save my brother's life that day, Sergeant. You gave us weeks more with him. You gave us hope in the middle of chaos." Sam's mouth opened, searching for words, but none came. Only a nod. Only the faintest, proudest glimmer in his tired eyes. At long last, someone had remembered. And in that crowded, humming courtroom, Samuel Carter stood not as a defendant, but as a hero. 2 weeks later, Samuel Carter stood in front of a mirror he could hardly believe was his own. The small apartment, modest but clean, was part of a Veterans Affairs housing program, expedited after the court proceedings. A one-bedroom unit, warm, safe, and private, a world away from alleyways and exhaust vents. Sam touched the frame hanging above the fireplace gently. Inside was his newly awarded Navy Cross, gleaming against a field of blue velvet, flanked by his Purple Hearts and service medals, recovered somehow from a dusty storage auction years ago by Daniel Hayes and his firm. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him from the mirror at first. This man stood a little straighter. His eyes, though still weathered, carried a quiet fire again, a memory of purpose. A soft knock broke the silence. Opening the door, Sam found Judge Evelyn Brooks standing there, out of her robes, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. In her hands she held a small, carefully wrapped box. "May I come in, Sergeant Carter?" she asked. "Please," Sam said, stepping aside. "Just Sam now," he added with a small, almost shy smile. "And just Evelyn," she answered, smiling back. They sat at the modest kitchen table, the weight of the past hanging gently between them, not heavy now but present, acknowledged. "I brought something," Evelyn said, opening the box. Inside was a bundle of worn letters tied together with faded ribbon. "My brother wrote to us every week while he was deployed," she explained. "These are some of his letters, and some of them mention you." Sam's hands, rough from years of labor and hardship, trembled slightly as he untied the ribbon. He unfolded the top letter carefully, recognizing Michael Brooks' precise, earnest handwriting at once. "Mom and Dad," Sam read aloud, his voice soft, halting. "Don't worry about me. I'm safe, thanks to one of my NCOs. Staff Sergeant Carter did something yesterday I still can't believe. When we got ambushed, he moved through fire like it wasn't even there. He wouldn't leave me, even when I ordered him to. Said no Marine gets left behind while he's breathing." Sam's voice cracked, and he lowered the letter, staring at it with an expression too complex for words. Evelyn spoke gently into the silence. "He wrote about you a lot, said you were the kind of Marine he hoped to become." Sam shook his head, tears threatening. "I wasn't special," he said gruffly. "I just did what needed doing." That's what makes you special, Evelyn said quietly, and it's why you matter. They sat there in silence for a while, letting the unspoken things settle. Finally, Evelyn reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Sam's scarred knuckles. Michael died trying to live up to the man who saved him, she said, and because of you, we had time to say goodbye. We had a chance that many families never get. Sam closed his eyes briefly, the burden he had carried for decades, the guilt, the loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten, lifting just a little. He had not failed. He had mattered. His sacrifices were not lost in the void. As Evelyn rose to leave, she hesitated. You know, she said, smiling faintly, when Michael was young, he used to say that heroes aren't the ones who get medals. Heroes are the ones who keep their promises, even when no one's watching. Sam chuckled softly, the sound rusty but real. I just did what a Marine's supposed to do, he said. And now, Evelyn said, opening the door to leave, we're going to make sure no one forgets it. Snow had begun to fall again, light and silent, blanketing the city outside. But inside that small apartment, something warmer stirred. Sam Carter stood by the window, watching the snow. He pressed a hand gently against the Navy cross displayed on his wall, and whispered words meant for no one but himself. No Marine left behind. At last, after years of silence, someone had remembered his name. At last, dignity had found its way back home. And in that quiet, perfect moment, a man once forgotten by the world finally stood tall again. Not for applause, not for fame, but because honor, once true, never truly fades. It only waits to be seen. Some people give everything they have for others and ask for nothing in return. But even the strongest can fade away when the world forgets to look. Honor doesn't vanish with age. Respect doesn't diminish with poverty. Sometimes it only needs one moment of remembrance to bring someone home. If you believe that true heroes deserve to be seen and honored, no matter how long it takes, comment 1 to stand for dignity, or 2, if you believe no sacrifice should ever be forgotten. And if stories like Sam Carter's matter to you, subscribe to Tell Us Strength, because the world needs more voices that remember, more hearts that refuse to look away. Together, we can make sure no one who served, no one who gave, no one who stood tall for us, ever stands alone again.